So after I watched Monsters Inc. a couple weeks ago and made a video about it, I felt, for sake of completeness, that I just had to revisit Monsters University as well. I mean, plus I just wanted to see Mike and Sully go to school one more time. Like, there's that too. To me, Monsters U is one of those kind of remarkable movies, just in the sense of how it surprised me by how good it was as a sequel. And it really just kind of impresses me here. This last time I watched it, I thought, man, it just impresses me in so many ways. I tend to expect sequels to be kind of these uninteresting, commercialized rehashes, at least in the world of movies. But Monsters U is kind of one of those rare birds that it's quite original, at least it seems original to me. And yet at the same time, it very effectively ties itself to its predecessor with this perfect combination of respect and fun lovingness or whatever. And and maybe, when I think about, man, this is a pretty fairly recent sequel to a film that goes way back to 2001. And that kind of makes me say, I kind of wonder if those 12 years in between 2001 and 2013 maybe say something about just the respect that the creators had, whoever was in charge of it. I don't know, in a project like that, I don't know how many people are actually in charge. But anyway, so this was the third time for me watching Monsters U. And I still had a blast watching it, every bit as much as I did the last couple times. I still feel like it seems to me to be on par with the original, maybe even a little better. But, and maybe even more importantly, this is something that I think often gets lost in sequels. But Monsters U is very much its own movie. So in a way, it's kind of like, to say which one is better is kind of like saying, do you like apples better or oranges? Because they're just not the same movie. You know, Monsters U has its own themes, its own concepts, characters, emphases, stylistic tone, etc. So anyway, mostly I'll just be running through some little jot notes that I jotted down after watching the movie, and then I'll just kind of make some general observations and then call it a day. So first, I jotted down the three most memorable, quote unquote, important moments in the movie that stood out to me throughout the movie. I was kind of thinking about throughout the movie, and then they stayed in my mind afterwards. So the first one was, and this is actually four little bits, so it's not one scene, but the first one I put down was the four steps of Mike, and I'll get into that in a minute. These four steps, which kind of seem to provide a bit of an outline frame for the outside layers of the film's structure. And the second thing is the riverside, that really cool riverside conversation between Mike and Sully, which seems like a pretty key thematic. It seems to me like almost the center point of the whole movie. And then the third thing I put down was that final Hardscrabble conversation between Mike and Sully at Hardscrabble, which helps resolve not only some very important key plot elements, but also some kind of moral of the story kind of aspects to the film, which is kind of cool. And then not to mention, it provides this really nice contrasting character development aspect that contrasts Hardscrabble against Waternoose from the first film. And I'll get into that later on here. But so first off on that list there, the four steps of Mike that I mentioned, I just think this is so cool. I thought it was really cool how these four steps kind of serve as almost like a visual poetry for the movie's outer structure. So here's how it goes as I see it. In the opening, I think it was the opening scene where we have young Mike, tiny little green eyeball Mike, and he's staring in awe at that line that you can only cross if you're a proper member of the scaring team, the Monsters Incorporated, Monsters Inc. team. And then of course he ends up crossing it sneakily. He gets across and they're all like, there's a and they catch him after he gets back out. But what that really represents, in addition to just being a lot of fun, but it really represents Mike's, at that really young age, his longing and ultimately his intentions for his life goal. Because really what he longs for is to be able to cross that line properly and be a scarer. And the next time we see Mike crossing a line is when he grows up and gets accepted to Monsters U, and he crosses the line of walking onto the campus. And he kind of looks at the line and steps across it, like there's some significance to it, which maybe has some symbolic significance for Mike in relation to that other line. Kind of like crossing this line to get onto the campus is one of the biggest, most important steps as he enters into the life stage where he's going to build in this life stage. And while he's at the university, he's going to build toward getting across that line that he's been longing for his whole life, the scaring, the scare floor line, in which, his whole life he's basically been living for, or at least we could say living toward being able to cross that line. So, uh, and then after that, after he crosses that line and goes onto the university campus, then that's when we get basically the substance of the movie. That's where most of the stuff takes place, with all the plot twists, and we get all the Mike and Sully and Randall bits, and we get Hardscrabble and Uzma Kappa and all the nasty bullies and all of that. Man, there's so much in this movie. So we get all that. And then near the end, Mike gets expelled, and he crosses that line again, but this time he's crossing the line in the wrong direction. And there's that significance again, number 3, crossing the line, number 3. This time it signifies a reversal of that sense of progress. That was what Mike's story was all about up till this point. It was all about his progress, where he finally crossed that line. He finally got into the university, and before you know it, he's going to cross the great line, be a scarer. But instead, line number 3, he's going in the wrong direction. By walking backward across that line, he's walking backward away from all his life dreams and his passionate sense of identity that's been driving him his whole life. And then finally, for number 4, we got near the end of the film, Mike finally steps over that scarer line again, like he did at the very beginning of the movie. Because even though he walked in the wrong direction by getting expelled, he still ended up, by the various careening turns of life, he still ended up stepping over the line of his greatest life goal, all wrapped up in his longings and his sense of purpose and identity and all that. So I think it's just so cool to see these outer portions of the film's structure. Like, a lot of the meat of the film is in the middle, obviously, but these outer portions, we got the 1, 2, and 3, and 4. It's like these outer portions of the film have this little bit of structure colored with these 4 poetic visual elements of the 4 steps over the line, and what they mean for what each one of those means for Mike's ambitions and desires, and how Mike's hopes and dreams interact with what's going on in his life. And it's kind of cool because on the outside pair of the 4, so if we've got the 1, 2, 3, and 4, we got the 2 on the inside and we got the 2 on the outside. And on the outside pair, we've got the ones that are about the specific part of his life dream, the scare floor. And then on the inner pair, we've got these 2 on the middle that go between the specific life dream of the scare floor. On the inner pair, we've got, between them, we have Mike's efforts to work toward that goal, which you could say forms an inclusio, to use a pointlessly uncommon word that I like a lot. You could say it forms a bit of an inclusio, meaning that there are the 2 things on the end, and they kind of they represent this continuum of everything in between, with these 2 things on the cap of it. It's kind of like those 2 on the inner part form an inclusio for the core story of the movie, namely Mike's days at Monsters University. Because in between those 2 moments, that's when all of Mike's Monsters U story happens. But what the 2 crossing the line moments mean for that inner portion of the movie is, visually speaking, those 2 moments, the 2 moments in the middle, those 2 moments come together to represent Mike's days at Monsters U as an experience of in and out. Literally, that's what it is. He goes in, then we have all that, and he comes out. We see the line he crosses to go in, the line he crosses to come out. It's in and out. It's an effort that results in failure. It's a process that begins and then just implodes or falls flat. But in contrast to that, the outer pair, these 2 on the outside, the 2 images of him crossing the line on the scare floor, one time as a kid, representing his longing and desire that's going to fill his whole life, and then the last one representing he's made it. He's finally become who he feels that he was born to be. That outer pair is the greater dream, or the deeper desire, which fulfills itself almost without reference to that stepping stone that was supposed to be in between. Kind of like he's trying to cross a river to get to the other side, and he gets hopelessly back on the shore where he started, all soaking wet and miserable. But then a few moments later, he just magically floats to the other side. Who knows exactly how? So anyway, I just think that that symbolic bit of the four steps for crossing lines, I just think that symbolic aspect of the four footsteps is just really cool to watch and adds a really nice kind of visually poetic layer to this pleasant, lighthearted movie. So that was the first kind of memorable, it's not really a memorable scene, it's a memorable set of images in the movie. And that was the first one I jotted down. The second one I jotted down was that riverside conversation between Sully and Mike after Sully followed Mike into the human world because Mike, I can scare kids, and he didn't know what he was going to find himself in. It was going to be terrible. But anyway, so Sully follows him in, and then he finally finds him. And the scene is just so beautiful. I love the picture when Sully approaches, from the woods or whatever. And we just see Mike up next to the river with that really nice 3D texture that looks kind of real in a certain way, but also this kind of quirky, it looks real and kind of a quirky and strangely relatable kind of way. But anyway, so Mike's just sitting there with that nice 3D texture for his green kind of funny looking back, and he's facing the water, just kind of sitting and staring with whatever kind of body language I imagine it's probably like a sagging. I just remember thinking whatever the body language was, it was really, really expressive and made that scene just look so rich. And then Sully slowly and sensitively approaches, and they have this conversation, which is directly about the movie's themes about self-worth and talent and friendship and all that good stuff. Just such a rich and beautiful scene, really emotionally compelling, thought-provoking, totally awesome, like the whole movie. So there's that one. And then the third one I listed, probably not quite as, memorable as the other ones, but still pretty cool. Partly I wrote it down because it's near the end and it kind of serves to wrap things up in a nice way. So it kind of stands out in my memory. But that's the final Hardscrabble conversation when Mike and Sully bumped into Hardscrabble next to the bus or somewhere around there. The bus is around somewhere. Because that was the conversation where Mike and Sully have just reconnected at that point. I think Hardscrabble actually comes up and he makes a comment about something that Sully just said to Mike because she could hear them. But she shows up after they've just reconnected, and that's an important resolving, scene by itself, them getting back together. But then we get to see Hardscrabble showing up to expose, for the first time, to expose her open-minded and teachable side, while still remaining firm with Mike and Sully about their being expelled. She doesn't, go back on that, and it really reinforces and helps tie together a lot of the thematic loose ends about diversity and talent and the value of the individual, while also doing so in a much more realistic manner than kind of the more common stereotypical plot twist that we see a lot of the time toward the end of certain movies when the leader figure or whoever just comes in and just declares all the good guys, the protagonist of the story, yeah, you guys were all right. I can't believe I was wrong. You were right. And I'm going to give you everything you want. We can all live happily ever after. No consequences for your actions. Which of course isn't how real life works, or certainly not the way real life should work. If you get expelled from school for blowing up school property, well, you get expelled no matter how much people like you, no matter how much of a good soul you are, So I thought that was cool, that we could see Hardscrabble showing that humility and kind of almost in a moral of the story kind of way. She basically tells them, you guys helped me to realize that people have value that in a way that I didn't realize before. But then, she still doesn't go back on their being expelled because there are consequences to your actions. And they got some consequences. And then, of course, the end of the movie is where Mike and Sully, they end up going to work in the mailroom, and they end up eventually being scarers after all. You could say that that end result is partly because of their positive attitude and their perseverance, but also maybe just because at the end of the day they had to end up being scarers because that's what they were born to be. Something like that. However you want to take it, but it's kind of cool. So those are some memorable just little moments and bits there. What about themes and concepts? The next thing I jotted down on my list after watching it was important themes. And I just listed a bunch, and these aren't, like I haven't fine-tuned this list. I'm just sharing it with you more or less the way I wrote it down in the order that it came to me. So the first one I put down was talent versus achievement/knowledge. And I put down friendship slash loyalty and friends vis-a-vis popularity, also mockery culture, and I kind of put all those together. And then I put the theme of honoring the unhonored, which I think is really important and really beautiful as a theme. And I put down the virtues of cooperation slash diversity. And I put down the theme of being a critic. So first off, definitely the big theme of the movie, I think, was talent versus achievement slash knowledge. The whole movie is about Mike slowly finding out that he can't be a scarer because he just doesn't have it. It doesn't matter how hard he tries. And I think, of course, it's a sad story element, but I think it's such a refreshing message as in terms of being a message for us to absorb. I think it's such a refreshing message in contrast to the thing that you tend to hear more often in shows and stuff, which is this mantra, you can be whatever you want to be. What a load of crap. Because almost no one can be literally anything they want to be. Like, really? Like, what kind of life have you been living to think that's true? For any individual, I think it's pretty fair to say there is some select number of things that you or I or so and so could choose to be and could actually be successful in. And then there's going to be a whole lot of things that whoever, me or you, is really got no chance of really doing. And in the case of Mike, being an impressive scarer is just not on that list, not on the good list. It's on the bad list of stuff that he can do. He can be whatever he wants to be. And let's not keep telling kids they can be whatever they want to be, because it's a load of crap. It's just not true. Telling kids they can be anything they want to be is, I would say, at best an exaggeration, at worst, a recipe for failure and misery. So Mike had no talent for scaring, but he had all of the achievement slash knowledge. By achievement, I mean the actions that it takes to level up in the field. He had the discipline, he had the good habits, he had the persistence, he had the education, etc. And the category of achievement overlaps significantly with knowledge, and it includes knowledge. So Mike knew all the scare techniques. He knew what they were called. He knew how to master them. He knew when to use them, when not to use them. He learned it all. He was ready to master the field, but he had no talent in the field, or at least in the specific area of being a scarer, doing the scaring. Sully, on the other hand, had all the talent, as well as the social prestige he inherited from his father, but he had no achievement slash knowledge. He didn't learn techniques or tools or anything else it takes to level up and master the craft. So at the end of the day, just like Mike, he ended up with good motivating Hardscrabble to have good reason to expel, both of them. But the difference was that with Sully, even though his attitude did warrant expulsion just like Mike, but the difference was that with Sully, he actually could do the work of scaring, whereas Mike couldn't. So if someone were to tell Mike, you can be whatever you want to be, well, that would just be a lie. But if someone were to tell Sully the same thing, he probably would have just shrugged and said, heck, I don't need to. I already am, A number of points in the movie kept reminding me, so I'm kind of switching topics here a little bit, but a number of points in the movie kept reminding me of a maxim that I heard several years back in regard to finding yourself, and particularly finding the career where you'll be most fulfilled and satisfied. And, so the professor, and I can't remember if this was some YouTube thing I was watching or if it was someone I saw in person or what, but somebody made the observation that it helps a lot to pay attention in life, pay attention and notice. Notice when there's something that you do, some task that needs to be done, and you do it, and you find that you can do it well. Other people can't do it quite as well, but you don't actually know how you're doing it. You do it and you do it well. People say, "Oh, good job," but you don't actually know how you did it. You don't know what little things you did in that process. You just know you went and did it, and well, it's done. Don't make such a big deal out of it. That's something that you want to pay attention for, and it's going to give you a tip, in finding yourself, because that's the kind of talent And in terms of this movie, that's the kind of talent that this movie touches on. Sully naturally can scare, but he doesn't actually know how he does it. Now, unfortunately, because he is arrogant, he just kind of leaves it there and says, hey, I don't need to study or work hard. Of course, in order to become a quality professional, somebody will have to study, in contrast to what Sully thinks. But what shows us that he is in the right field, he is in the field that he's wired for. What shows us that is the fact that he's got this advantage right out of the gate to begin with. Because a professor of scaring, let's say like maybe one of the ones they showed there on the movie, or preferably some other guy, because I wasn't sure how I felt about that professor. He didn't seem like the greatest professor. But anyway, a professor of scaring could take a video of Sully, and say, oh yeah, so Sully, he's using this one technique, and he's using little bits of this technique, and look how he does this thing here, and how he does that, and how it all comes together to be effective. He could analyze it like that. But if he did, Sully would say, oh, really? Oh, I was trying to be scary, that's all. Because Sully's got a talent that includes the ability to automatically do all these little things that other people would have to figure out how to do. And that's how real life works a lot of the time. And one of the ways to help get you into a vocation where you're more likely to feel fulfilled and alive over against being stressed and miserable is to watch yourself and watch those around you as you live life, and look for those tasks or skills that other people say you did well, but you don't know how you did it. Because once you find those skills or tasks, you've probably found something that you really want to have be a big part of your vocation. Now, usually that wouldn't be a vocation, because vocations almost always utilize multiple skills. Even scaring does, but scaring is pretty close to being just one skill for the whole vocation. But that's not how life works most of the time. Usually there's going to be a lot of skills that come together to make a vocation. So you still have to pick a career, but you can narrow it down by thinking about how many, once you find that skill or that area of talent, then you can narrow it down by finding out how many vocations there are that use that skill that comes naturally to you. And then, of course, the next step while you prep for that career, of course, would be to study and analyze and develop that skill that comes so naturally to you, in contrast to the way Sully thinks things are going to work. And I've definitely met a lot of people in real life who think kind of like Sully, like, what do you mean? I already know how to fill in the blank. I already know how. I don't need to learn all that stuff, They already know, but they can't tell you anything about what they know. They just know. And generally, if you've got a talent like that and you're really good, you can be mediocre. Maybe you can be a little good, but you can be mediocre if you use your talent and you're automatically good at it. You can do it without knowing what you're actually doing, but you won't be as excellent as you could be, which is why talented writers study writing. Talented actors study acting, talented business owners, people study business, etc. Even if they've already got what it takes right out of the box that they were born with, it's a different matter once you cultivate that skill to the next level. And then the inverse principle on the opposite side, whereas when you find, your thing that you're good at and you don't know how you're doing it, then that's probably going to be a key aspect of being able to find a thriving career for you. But then the thing on the opposite side is that if you're looking in from the outside and you want to find the most skilled teacher of a certain skill, it's going to be the opposite. You're probably not going to be looking for the most talented person in that sense. You're not going to be looking for a Sully or somebody who used to be a Sully and then he built on top of that skill in a good way. That person would probably be helpful, but what you really want to look for is somebody with mediocre talent who wasn't born with it all, who had to learn how to be good. Because now he doesn't just know how to do it, he doesn't just have the ability, but he actually knows how he does it. Because for that guy, if he didn't know how with all the details, then he wouldn't be able to do it. He doesn't have the talent, which is why Sully is a not so great teacher. If you remember that scene in the movie where he tries to teach Mike how to growl, he basically says, "You got to just reach in and let it out," and might have helped a little bit. I'm not even sure if it helped a little bit, but the thing is that Sully just didn't have a clue. He could do it, but he didn't have a clue. Or on the other hand, Mike could teach Sully how to growl because Mike had to know how because he didn't he didn't have any talent. Definitely one of the painful things in life that a lot of people have to go through is the experience Mike went through, the experience of slowly coming to find out that he doesn't have what it takes to do what he has always dreamed of doing. And a lot of people come to that point. Now, what will be even worse, and happens often, is when, in contrast to Mike, the situations where no one tells you, and you think that you're just not working hard enough. And fortunately for Mike, he got told, rather than just keeping on trying and trying and failing while continuing to keep on investing in this career that's just going to leave him feeling drained and pathetic. Now, one thing that's really cool is how Mike found out that even though he can't do the vocation of his dreams, he can still use his passions and interests in line with the talents that he does have. So he ended up becoming this manager because that job, which maybe he made up that job, maybe there weren't any scarer managers before, but anyway, he became a manager because that would utilize skills that he did have. Because while he wasn't scary or physically impressive, he was a good coach. He was well studied, analytical, determined. He was a good motivator. So he was able to use his actual skills along with his passion topic, his general interest area, which is pretty cool because that's something that can happen in the real world as well. You might find that you can't have your dream career and that in that dream career, you would actually be constantly miserable and constantly exhausted. But there may be other things that you can do with the same or a similar interest area, knowledge base, whatever, that you're so into, your passion, something else that has the same or similar interest areas, but uses the skills that you actually have. And even if you can't, even if there's no actual career that you can find that would have that balance, you could at least have some kind of hobby that has a lot of those elements, while ideally you pursue some career that you do enjoy as well, and that includes at least some mild overlap with these interest areas that are really your passion areas. But in Mike's case, he actually got the career. It wasn't the career of his dreams, but it's kind of right up next to it. He uses the same interest base, the same passion area, but it actually taps into his real skills, which is going to leave him feeling a lot more fulfilled and a lot more meaningful day by day, living that life and living it well. So that's the big theme. Maybe that's like the theme of the movie, but I jotted down a bunch of them. The next one I jotted down was friendship and loyalty, which of course has to be on the table because it's Mike and Sully. So we got to talk about friendship and loyalty. Since that was what the first movie was in large part included a lot of discussion about. Now this time, the whole friendship theme is also talking about friends vis-a-vis popularity, because Sully's popular, but he doesn't have real friends. Mike, on the other hand, is unpopular. And then finally, as the movie goes on, both of them end up getting in with the really unpopular guys who are actually, at the end of the day, great friend material. So it touches on that aspect of the whole friend theme. And then it also touches on mockery culture, which really fits into the same theme in a way, because the mockery culture is all the people who are the opposite of friend material. These people who are the opposite of friend material, but tend to have some amount of popularity in at least some sense, because if they weren't popular to some degree, then they wouldn't have the social capital that it takes for their mockery to be effective. So that's definitely, to some extent, a theme that's going on in the background. I think honoring the unhonored is another really interesting theme. I think really an important and a priceless concept running through this movie. Sully learns to drop his arrogance and actually become Mike's friend. and he drops that reveal, in that scene by the riverside when he just says, because I am your friend, surprise, surprise. At some point, he decided that he and Mike were actually friends. So on the one hand, Sully learns to drop his arrogance and become Mike's friend. But even more significantly, both Mike and Sully gradually learn that they can actually enjoy the company of Uzma Kappa. Mike and Sully, originally they begrudgingly resort to befriending these really uncool people with the intention of getting away as soon as they can. But then over time, they realize that they're really not better than Uzma Kappa at any kind of deep level. They're not better than them. They just think they are. And we, as the watchers, we gradually come to realize that Mike and Sully actually have something in common with the bullies in the movie. Because just like the bullies, they fail to appreciate the worth and dignity of certain real human beings, particularly those Uzma Kappa people. And just like the bullies, they treat these people with some amount of disrespect, whether it's expressed or whether it's just inside, the way they think and the way they talk behind their backs and stuff. But then over time, their attitude changes and they come to realize that every person is unique. Remember that scene where they're all looking in the windows and Mike says, what do these guys have all in common? Only one thing, they're all unique. Over time, our protagonists come to realize that every person is unique and every person is valuable. Meanwhile, Hardscrabble's mindset is the stark opposite of that. She only values excellence, and she only values people of excellence. But she unlearns that value system by the end of the movie, which is why she chooses to admit Uzma Kappa into the program. So definitely part of the way this theme resolves and kind of turns into almost like a moral of the story kind of thing. That definitely happens in near the end there, Hardscrabble's conversation with Mike and Sully, where she basically tells them that, because that's where the topics of talent and achievement, the topic of honoring the unhonored, where all these things find a really important kind of resolving, almost like a talking point resolution. Because at that point, even the arrogant aficionado character Hardscrabble, even she has a change of heart and comes to realize that sometimes those who are different than us and aren't impressive by our selected standards, that those people may actually have something to offer and may in fact deserve to sit at the same height as us. On a similar note, I jotted down as another theme of the values of cooperation, diversity, and respect, which is kind of right along the same vein. The whole, no two scarers are alike, and all that. And, Mike and the Uzma Kappa as characters who don't have certain skills, they kind of need to learn to remember to be themselves and to lean into their actual skills rather than thinking that they're just not worth anything if they can't be Sully or if they can't be Hardscrabble, that kind of thing. They do have work, even if they repeatedly fail and become a obvious failure at the things that they think are the only skills worth having, the only things that they personally, I need to be able to do this. This thing is what's going to give me value. And then they fail and they fail. Turns out they're a failure at that. And the question is, if that's you, do you have any worth? If you are a failure at, if you are hopeless at the thing that you think you have to be doing? And the answer is no two scarers are alike. Maybe that's not the thing that's going to be the core to your identity. And then jealousy and resentful rivalry are definitely also a theme, since that's the whole Mike and Sully dynamic. And it's also the opposite of cooperation, which is the other thing, part of that little mini list there that I just put there. Cooperation, which is what all the characters need to learn, especially Sully, who thinks he's good enough. He doesn't need to cooperate. He doesn't need to learn to work with anybody. He's got it all, The movie definitely really leans into as well the idea of tension due to not understanding one another, tension due to diversity without understanding. Because Mike and Sully don't have a clue about each other or about anybody in Uzma Kappa. But the more they come to understand each other, the more positive things end up coming out of their cooperation. They're learning how to cooperate and to get along and to understand each other and to honor the diversity and honor one another. by how they work together. And the last one I jotted down, I just said being a critic because I couldn't think of another way to say it. But I was just thinking about the whole aspect of the movie where Hardscrabble is kind of close-minded and dogmatic. She's limited by her imagination, and also she's limited by her elevated position. But in the end, it turns out that she wasn't beyond being able to express humility and adjust her viewpoints, which she does near the end there. So anyway, those are the themes that I jotted down, things that stood out as I watched through it this last time. It's funny, in an interesting contrast to the more epic good and evil kind of style in the first movie. In this movie, in contrast, there actually are no villains, except for the bullies, who are they're a little more like sandburrs than villains. They're unimpressive and unremarkable, which is probably possibly kind of intentional, since a lot of the time that's what bullies are. But the primary antagonists, if you want to call them that, would have been Hardscrabble and Sully, both of whom are won over by the end. So much more of a relational story, in addition to feeling much more mature and grounded in different ways. I mean, probably in some ways that feeling, that vibe, it's probably partly just due to the higher technology that's available. So they're able to give us visuals that have a lot more scope in the scenes they show, and a lot more gravitas, scenes that have like fog and textures and all this kind of stuff. So that gives it a little more of that mature, more grounded feel. But also it's just a much more relational story, and the seems to me like the plot structure is much more sophisticated, at least just from my watching it just now, that kind of mental glance that I kind of took. It feels like a more sophisticated plot structure. So a very different movie in a lot of ways. Another thing, last time I watched Monsters Inc., I kind of noticed that part of the way they handle things is that creepy looking characters were bad, like the spider guy. What's his name? Water News. Creepy looking people were bad. Cuddly, fun looking people were good, like Mike and Sully, obviously. Whereas in this one, creepy Hardscrabble, with all of her centipede, millipede legs, whatever it is there, she's just like along and like, what kind of a monster is this? She's got to be the villain. But creepy Hardscrabble is creepy because she's intimidating and she's difficult to approach, rather than because she's evil. The bullies, the real kind of bad people, the bullies are, the way they look is just kind of unremarkable, which is kind of appropriate because as petty bullies, they are unremarkable. That's what they are. So their look is unremarkable. And then there's the librarian, who's the other candidate for being, the ugly villain. She's also ugly. She's not really creepy or evil looking, like she's not a spider or a centipede or something. She's just kind of like, but if you take the way I interpret Hardscrabble's ugly and creepy because she's intimidating. Well, if you take that, well, the librarian is also intimidating and unapproachable. And then the only other particularly scary looking monsters I remember in the movie were the girls who had the glowing eyes. And once again, they're intimidating. And that's their role. That's the symbolic value of their kind of scary, ugly, creepiness. They're intimidating people. So it seems that whereas the first film used scariness and ugliness in more of the fairy tale flavor as an indicator that we ought to be afraid of these certain characters because they in a certain way symbolically represent evil, or they symbolically represent or reflect danger, that kind of thing. In contrast to that, in this movie, it seems like they take things down to earth a little bit by using scariness or ugliness instead to represent the feeling we get when we meet someone who makes us feel that way, whether because they're really impressive, like just big and impressive, and, or because they're just really important, big, important people with, with authority or whatever, or for whatever reason, we do as people in society, we feel fear and discomfort around certain people. And those scary people who are intimidating and impressive and whatever, they could be jerks, like those girls with the glowing eyes, they could be jerks. Or they could just be important and difficult to approach, like Hardscrabble, who are kind of living in a different level of life than most of the rest of us are, you know? Or for that matter, they could just be like the librarian, just somebody who you really ought to treat with proper respect. And you ought to feel a little bit afraid around certain people. At least you should be if you're going to be making noise in the library, you know. But even Hardscrabble, even intimidating centipede leg Hardscrabble, in contrast to Waternoose in the first movie, Hardscrabble, even Hardscrabble can have humility and make positive changes. And I think it's kind of interesting how in the last movie, Waternoose looked completely friendly on the outside, you know, in terms of personality. So not his being a spider with all those legs and all those eyes. So he was scary, like in his his physicality. But in terms of his personality, he was really friendly on the outside, but he was totally corrupt on the inside. And he seemed like the nicest guy, but he was bad to the bone on the inside. Whereas in the second movie, Hardscrabble, on the outside, on her personality, she looks completely heartless and angry. And physically, she's got more legs than Hardscrabble, or more legs than Waternoose. But anyways, you know, on the outside, she looks heartless and angry, but she ends up on the inside to be teachable and humble when the situation calls for it. That's kind of cool. Nice little contrast there. So it's like, yeah, you can't judge a book by its cover. Some people are scary, but maybe sometimes, maybe they are just the very exact kind of scary that we need. And then other people might be jovial and smiling and nice like Waternoose, and they might actually be just the kind of friendliness that we don't need. So anyway, those are some of my thoughts on some of the things that I noticed this time going through Monsters U. I think both movies, Monsters Inc. and Monsters U, I think they're both really pretty pretty good films. I think Monsters U is so unique just for being a sequel to a popular movie that just really works well. And thematically, it discusses a lot of good topics that kids and adults alike will benefit to be thinking about. Things like, what's the difference between a real friend and a popularity friend? And you know, what does it mean if you have a life dream that you may not be able to reach? You know, what's the difference between talent and growth? You know, and how should we act to, and how should we think toward people who seem like they're less than us? And then maybe the biggest question that the movie addresses is that big old giant heavy question: what kind of worth do you have if you are no good at the thing that you feel you should be good at? You know, and that's where we get all those wonderful Mike Sully conversations, from the river scene, the riverside scene, all the way to the bus conversation, you know, etc. But anyway, I've spent enough time talking about a walking green eyeball and his fuzzy frenemy and all their university days. That's it for this video. Have a good day.